All right, hi everybody. Um, I, f- I feel like my marketing team wrote that and I forgot about it and we sent it to document. Thanks. Um, so I'm not doing slides. I have a Figma board open right now. So there's a few screens behind the panels. You may have to zoom in and zoom out. If you can't see anything or the writing's small, let me know. I switched to using Figma as my main presentation tool during COVID because no one was looking at my slides before COVID and definitely not during COVID when everyone's on a Zoom screen. So I figured this could be a fun, interesting way. So we're going to be talking about the glue code monster. And we've named the glue code monster. We call him Gludo. So this is Gludo. And today I kind of want to focus on three key takeaways. So Gludo is the worst. He is the glue code monster, and he makes developers unhappy. Another thing to consider, and what else makes developers unhappy, is the people they work around or they work with, so those digital teams, if they're unhappy, developers would likely tend to be unhappy by proxy. Unhappy customers, unhappy business, it tends to really hurt that developer experience. And something to keep in mind is we're going to go pretty deep on glue code, what it is, and how that can be the old way, and then we'll start considering what are some of the alternative ways, whether it's composition, orchestration, using different services and tools to help mitigate some of the risks of glue code. So the agenda is really quickly. We'll do a warm-up. I'll get into some notes and housekeeping, and then we'll get going. I will skip all of the about me, about uniform stuff. That's all on the website. So we'll fly through that. Then we'll talk about what's happening in the modern stack, how websites, apps are all being built and what they're starting to look like over time. Then we'll get deep into Gludo, glue code, how to identify if you are contributing to Gludo's persistence, and what we can do as an alternative approach. So can I get everyone to stand up? If you can, and then are happy to. You don't have to, but if you want to, stand up, have a quick stretch. All right. Now, okay, everyone's loose. You just came back from lunch. Perfect. I would like you to stay standing if you build websites or apps or APIs or something along those lines. All right, we got a lot of people standing. Great. Oh, it's okay. You can, raise hands if you, okay. And how many of you stay standing, hands up, if you are working with APIs? Right, everyone's still up. Stay standing, hands up, if you're writing integration code. All right. We got a few folks, okay. What if you're using API code, or if you're using APIs from third-party services, so if you have a headless CMS, a commerce system, something along those lines, or you're from your own APIs. You're making APIs or you're using and retrieving. So yeah, we still got a lot of people standing. Great. Stay standing if you have to query and bind data from an API payload into some sort of view. There's a lot of people standing. You have to bind data and content from more than one API. Right? You're working on more than one website or app. Okay, here we go. If you're a developer and you love doing that binding of content and data to views, stay standing. Or if you're an engineering or marketing technology leader and you love the time and effort spent on binding data and content to views. Yeah. All right, we got a few, okay. If you're still standing, Gludo loves you. Okay. Thank you for going through the exercise with me. Now, quick intro. So I'm a VP of Customer Solutions at a company called Uniform. Uniform helps customers make websites and apps. We have a pretty strong client base. Customer Solutions is kind of a strange title, but any team or role or resource, so solution engineering, we're going in, we're helping our customers figure out how to assemble their tech stack. That's the type of teams that I work with and support and enable. Uniform is very quickly, it's just a visual workspace for digital teams, so you can blend content, data, technology, I'm pushing marketing to add design because now we have some nice design system tooling in our stack. So blending these different things together to be able to deliver experiences across multiple channels. At a glance, we have customers, we have partners, we have some certifications. We're a real company, been around for a bit. Series A going into Series B. I will put this all online too, so you don't have to go too detailed. But with that being said, I did have a housekeeping note, actually on the far right here. There you go. If you are looking to take photos because they're not all slidified, feel free, take photos, post them on LinkedIn, Twitter, Threads. How many people are using Threads or are like actively engaged in using Threads? All right. So yeah, I got 100 million users overnight, and yeah. All right. But yeah, feel free to connect with Uniform Connect with me. Okay. Now, let's get into, very quickly here, this topic of a modern stack. So there's this company. Has anyone heard of Forrester or Gartner or these analyst firms that do a bunch of research? So I got some nodding here. So Forrester has done this research across a variety of different companies, and they've come up with this data point that there is a pretty significant return on investment for companies that have a composable architecture. 295%, that's not a small amount, over 3 years. But specifically, publishing times go down, development times also decrease, right? So they are able to take some pretty massive gains. So when we talk to customers, we talk to developers, talk to designers, talk to digital teams about composable architectures, generally it looks, we have this high-level vision as, hey, you might be building an app or an experience or a screen or something on mobile, and you're going to pull pieces of content and data from many different sources, and it'll all fit neatly on a page. And so you think your wiring up will look something like this, and everyone comes out of it with these nice page speed performance scores. We had a customer recently send us this, and they were like, did you know there's fireworks when you get 100 across the board? And I did not. I thought that was cool. So it gives you fireworks when you hit that. So this is the expectation. And actually, if you follow the thought leaders and the marketing teams, there's a lot of this type of content of what's happening in composable architecture. In reality, it starts to look more and more like this, where you have the spaghetti diagrams of things connecting to other things, your code base, your networking, your funneling data through your apps and screens starts to look like this. And ultimately, you end up with this notion, this amount of glue code in order to be able to bring everything together from these composable systems. So Gluto, his argument is glue code is great because he survives on glue code. So this term glue code, it's got its own Wikipedia page. It's not a new term, but I started to really dive into how big of a problem is glue code. So the first thing I found that I thought was meaningful, this gentleman named Charlie Green wrote this blog post in 2019, and he has a greenfield project, net new, from scratch, no technical debt. And he complains in this article about how he had this super pedantic product owner that made him log and made the whole engineering team log everything in Jira, all the tickets neatly organized, everything. And at the end of a year of working on this greenfield project, he went through and he was very thankful to have that pedantic product owner, because he could then take all of the effort and all the tickets and put them in two buckets. Here, bucket one is how much effort was spent building features, functions, components, things that add a tremendous amount of value to customers in the business, and how much effort was being spent just cobbling stuff together. And it was a 50-50 split on a project with no technical debt. That's a tremendous amount of effort and time just cobbling things together. So this quote, it wasn't a profound thing, but the job of cobbling things together, taking somewhere up to 50% of a software engineer's time, there's not a lot of discourse, not a study, there's not a lot of people talking about glue code. And now that he went on to say a prediction that as the next decade of software development will require more and more glue code, so that proportion will increase and more time being spent cobbling things together. And really, it comes back to this type of diagram where as we have smaller components and smaller surface size, the amount of glue code to bring everything back together increases. So smaller components require more glue code. And so we can kind of see this graph where monoliths maybe didn't have a tremendous amount of glue code, but as you start getting into coarser services, microservices, and your components become more modular and smaller. Your surface area becomes smaller, but you're then having more things to put together. So I heard this quote from one of our agency partners, and this has got to be one of the biggest developer experience problems that no one's talking about. And I was like, okay, I heard it from one agency partner. We got 50 in our network. Let's do a survey. Let's go talk to our agency partners. We got responses from 30 agency, like CTOs or VPs of engineering across 7 countries. And we got this interesting data point that front-end, full stack, and back-end attrition, so people leaving their organizations, like so much of it can be attributed to integration code or glue code or just wiring things together. That came up as a common complaint of developers over and over and over again. So we're now looking at 50% of all effort in a greenfield project being related to glue code, and then 50% of attrition being attributed to developers complaining about having to write too much glue code. Does that sound reasonable? Is anyone here saying, yeah, I see some nodding, okay. So developer experience is quite heavily impacted by glue code. So great for Gludo though, right? Like we need some more Gludo. So let's take a look at the glue code monster. So Gludo, we're naming him, we're personifying him, we're trying to create a very simple way to represent glue code, and oftentimes we start asking, do you have code to clean up a messy API response so that your data fits the front end? Or do you adapt your front end components to the specific response of an API output? And now you have this code to be able to manipulate. Are you mixing domain data and design data in models? So you have, you might have something like an article, but you want fonts and styles and colors to be different, and you're actually mixing those two types of data in order to accommodate this. These are some pretty typical questions that if you're saying yes to one or more of these, you probably have glue code in your system, in your stack. So the way we're defining glue code, it's heavily defensive code that fetches data and cleanses it. Does anyone here disagree? All right. Does this sound about right? Do you feel that glue code, we see this, glue code creates this technical debt or tight coupling, and it can sometimes create scenarios where you have to refactor significantly. So the goal here, we've talked about glue code, we've identified glue code, the pain points of glue code, and the impact on developer experience. So what can we do from here? So what I want to talk about next is a bit of an example. So we're just something simple like a hero component. We're going to wire up a hero component, and in my hero component, I have my schema on one side, I have my display on the other side. It's expecting the React component is expecting some props for that schema or for that component to render. But what if I need some variations? So no longer using that view, I have image left, image right, kind of common scenarios. Okay. So if I'm using a CMS, I can create a content model for the hero, but then I have to add this kind of drop down to describe the variant. So this is that adding or mixing what's domain content versus and adding in design related attributes to be able to accommodate for that. So I have to put that in my model, and then I have to write some code, defensive code, to know what display to show at what point. Now, if I want to add a hero to that banner and add a call to action, I either extend that prop, but I might have some breaking changes. So oftentimes, I'm going to copy that hero. I'm going to create a new one called CTA hero, and then I'm going to repeat the steps of wiring up from my model and making it available to users. And then someone comes along, probably in marketing or design. Hey, it'd be awesome if we wired up that hero with some sort of other data source. Okay, let's put some product information in that hero. Well, the first hero component's not wired up for that data source, so now I got to create a third hero called Commerce Hero. And now I'm repeating all of those steps of wiring up that hero to a different data source. More code being written to accommodate these edge cases, but they're not actually edge cases. They're quite common. And over time, you start to end up with model pollution. So your schema that you're feeding your components. In the first iteration, it kept pretty simple, but now you're adding things like title alignment and title color to be able to manipulate what's happening in the view. Then you might be adding different images for mobile devices. Then you're adding in variants, and before you know it, you have a lot of glue to accommodate all these variations, a lot of glue code to accommodate these variations, and a difficult content model in your CMS or in your data source. So then this kind of feedback loop happens where marketers and other digital team members start finding it difficult to use and create content and create data, so then they just send it over to a developer in another dev ticket. So now your devs are the content owners and not just the code owners. So the loop is quite difficult. All right, let's go add some personalization and let's create experiments and do A/B testing. Now we're getting into some more sophisticated. Okay, now we have another data source that's mixing with other data sources to show variations, and you can kind of see like the steps keep increasing. The complexity keeps increasing. And this is problematic. So now we're seeing glue code growing and growing and growing. So who wants to say no to glue code? Have I convinced? Yeah, okay, I got some hands up. All right, great. So the first thing I'm going to show is kind of, we're coining this term called DXCP. It's an acronym for Digital Experience Composition Platform. I'm not super keen on the acronym itself, but the concept I'm pretty keen on. So what we're doing, and Uniform is one of many providers in the space. There's like 16 vendors, so there's a lot of options to solve this type of problem. But ultimately, we're creating some tooling to automate the process so you can orchestrate and bring your APIs and your data together. Then you can have this no-code experience orchestration where you can create experiences, create visuals in a drag-and-drop form, and that works both for websites and web apps that are authenticated. It also works because of the composition. It's not really a page. It could be a mobile screen. It could be a voice skill or voice interface. So there's a lot of flexibility in a composition. And then you can start to bring in your design system. If you have a design system and a component library, you have a high amount of reuse with this type of tooling. When it all gets broken down, there are a lot of different folks that have their hands on these digital experiences. Your end users and end customers, they have some pretty high demands. They want that page speed performance to be 100 across the board, and they want relevant and contextual experiences so that they don't have to go find a needle in a haystack in your app or in your website. Then you have these marketing and content teams that have to create those experiences to meet the needs of those end users. Designers and developers are setting up their guardrails, making sure it's not getting too much of a mess for other people on the team. So that's how it all comes together. Ultimately, the goal is to enable teams to work better together, whether it's designing, practitioners, engineering. So remember those key 3 points when I talked about developer experience is highly influenced by the other people on your team. So here we're starting to look at, hey, like if your team is happy, the developers are also happy, and you can kind of form that unit. So I'm going to show an example here. And kind of the goal of this example is to demonstrate how a component, a front-end component, is highly reusable, but to be highly reusable, it's kind of got to be a bit dumb. So in this example, all I'm doing is, code on screen isn't always the greatest. Can everyone see it at the back on the side screens? Yeah, great. So you can kind of see here, nothing really special here, right? It's a generic React component with a bunch of props. The only thing that's unique or bespoke is this import at the top, but otherwise everything is super generic. So by keeping it super generic and highly reusable, what we can do is, instead of writing code that goes specifically into those props, so pulling an API parameter of a field and dropping it into some of these props like title text, I can keep it generic and it doesn't have to be like heading 1.text. So I can keep it generic and reusable, but ultimately then something needs to tell the prop what to display. And that's where we can do things like connecting multiple sources and multiple APIs with configuration, and then binding different data. So on the right-hand side here, I have my parameters. This is the schema that the prop is, or the component is expecting. These are my props. So eyebrow text, title, description, but then I can select from any data source and do data binding. So this process of data binding or content binding, some people call it orchestration, and so there's a neat way to be able to get content and data from any of the sources into any of the components, and it's one way of reducing and minimizing the amount of glue code that your system needs over time. So I'm going to go over here and just show it really quickly here, right? So what I have is a hero component. I have a couple of different hero components. So I have one for beans, I have one for engineers, I have one. So in this example, I have this text and I have this object. So this content object is coming out of Contentful. How many people have heard of Contentful? It's a headless CMS. All right, so we got, okay, great. That's a good amount of hands. So what we're doing is we're scoping. We're looking in. I have a content block content type. Here are all of my entries in Contentful, and I can pick and choose which content type I want. So if I were to remove this one and add in a different one and then hit save, what's happening is the data is being dynamically replaced, the prop is being dynamically filled without writing any code, and I can see here that my title is being pulled out of the title field in that entry. Subtitle is being left blank, nothing's being put into that, but the component's not breaking. And I don't have a button, but I do have this image, and this image is also coming from that entry. So that's one example, one data source, everything wired up neatly without having to customize that component. Now if I go into this next example, what I have here is I have multiple data sources. So I have an article, so I'm using a different content type. I'm pulling articles now into the banner. So it's no longer that example of pulling a product or product image. It's the same hero component, but completely different type of content. I'm also pulling in from a different data source. So I have Contentful pulling in some information here. I have Content Stack, so another. Have you guys heard of Content Stack? It's another headless CMS. I should see I know at least one person used to work at Content Stack here. So here I am pulling in a different piece of content, a different content entry into this banner. And then finally, I'm using an Algolia index to pull in this product, this Impresso 12-perk coffee maker. Now, if I go and look at how that's being stuffed into the props, my title is coming from this Contentful article, and there's my title. I'm picking that field. The subtitle is coming from Content Stack and is picking this field, and the button copy is also coming from Content Stack, and I've picked a field here called the title. And then the link is a hierarchy is part of Uniform so that your link doesn't have to be in the headless CMS. You can divide and conquer or place it based on a site tree. And then the image is coming out of that product description or that product set in that Algolia index. So I'm now mixing and matching data sources to stuff the props. If I want to change the title and I say, okay, you know what, I'm going to go pull that from a different data source, I can go back into Content Stack. So it's kind of like this Postman type of experience with a visual interface. I can go pull the title, I can click connect, and it's going to swap that out. So without writing any code or doing any bespoke changes, highly reusable generic components, multiple data sources, no glue code. All right. So on that note, we can start to get into the scenario where we have this sticky mess We add in a little bit of tooling to separate it and recombine it without running glue code. Gluto says, hey, I'm retiring. Uniform is eating my lunch here. And if we think about those three key takeaways, so Gluto's the worst, unhappy developers. We saw that. Unhappy digital teams, unhappy customers, unhappy business, also leads to unhappy developers. The old way is to write a ton of glue code. The new way is to use tools around composition and orchestration. That's all I got for today. And thanks. So.